Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, wish you all a warm welcome to the 2016 PRIO Annual Peace Address. Now in its 7th year, the PRIO Annual Peace Address simply offers an opportunity for PRIO and for our extended family, part of which is here tonight, to acquire new perspectives, to engage with other voices, and to continue to build the insight that shall contribute to a more peaceful world. Not the least is it important to challenge those of us who spend our time doing peace research to think differently, to turn the ball around and look at it from other vantage points. I'm very honored to have Francesca Borri, Italian journalist and writer, giving this year's Peace Address. Francesca's reporting and her books from Kosovo, from Palestine, from Syria, and elsewhere have received wide acclaim. With degrees in international law and conflict resolution, Francesca also has a sharp analytical lens, and she uses that lens not only to cast a light on conflictual politics out there, but also to reflect on her own profession and ultimately also on her own practice as a journalist. As peace researchers, we are much closer to journalism than we realize. We depend on journalists' work for empirics. We ask many of the same questions, sometimes framed differently, but ultimately the same questions. We face the same challenges, negotiating access, cultivating relationships, giving something back to those who helped us, those who protected us. But even more fundamental is the question about the importance of a free press, of journalism, to peace, regardless of whether you define peace as the absence of violence or as a societal order in which everybody have their rights and their freedoms protected. What is the value of journalism? What distinguishes good from bad, or for that matter, mediocre journalism? Can journalism do harm? And with technological change bringing about new forms and new platforms of communication, where is it that journalism is headed? The title of Francesca's talk is The Journalistic Contribution to Peace. Knowing Francesca and having read quite a bit of her work over the summer, I know that we have something to look forward to. Francesca's talk will be followed by a conversation where we will be joined by Robert Mood. And after that, we would like you all to stay on and join us for a reception with a bite and a drink, as well as a short greeting by the University of Oslo's Inga Bostad. But now I see no reason to keep you waiting any longer. I want to welcome Francesca to the stage. Please, Francesca, the floor is yours.
So I was in Aleppo, one of the first days. It was the start of the war, and I was basically in a white street, a street that doesn't exist anymore, and suddenly we come under mortar fire, and we all rush into basements, into the shops, storerooms, one on top of the other, and there was no space anymore. And an old man at some point, he notices me, and he notices my bulletproof jacket, my bulletproof vest, and I had, the sign, press. And he drags himself out, and amid the dust, the smoke, and the blast, and come, he says, with these hand gestures, he says, come, your life is more important than mine. He says, so the world will know. And sometimes, even today, sometimes I still see him out there as he walks away, and he says, so the world will know. It was really hard for journalists, and what really hurts is that you see events as they unfold, step by step, and day by day you see history as it might still be changed, and you see wars as they might still be stopped. The first time we have seen a foreign fighter in Syria, it was October 2012. But from Rome, from London, from Paris, we were replied, and where's the news? Any war has got its mercenaries. And the first time we have seen a head being cut off with a knife, and cut off in daylight openly as if it was normal. It was August 2013. Yes, August 2013. The first time we came across this group that was so different from all other groups, and this group everybody was scared of, and whose men were from so many countries that on the front line I remember they were speaking English and not Arabic, and it had such a strange name, and it was called just Al-Dawlat, the state. But we were replied, and so there were 2,000 armed groups in Syria. So we were replied, where's the news? The first time we have seen jihadists, there were so few. And the first time I've seen a toddler in my life, a toddler washed up on a beach, I can't even remember because I'm Italian and I come from a city on the sea, and basically I grew up among corpses of migrants on the beach, and I grew up among those who keep on getting a tan. My most important reportage, Aleppo under barrel bombs, I think the most important because Assad still today says that they are just fabrications, barrel bombs. It's a lie. It's just rebels' propaganda. And that's the only piece still today, is the only independent eyewitness account. Assad someday will look into my eyes and he can't lie to me. He can lie to all of you, but he can't lie to me. And basically that piece has never been published in English because it was clear it would have run for the Baye Calvados. And so it was turned out by all editors, and no one thought of Syria. They all thought of their own correspondence. The Baye Calvados is the most important war journalism prize. That's why it was never published in English. And that was the only eyewitness account of barrel bombs. So here I am, 4 years on, because I didn't study journalism. I come actually from another world, another job. I was a specialist of international law. Only, I don't know, I didn't want to find myself someday, maybe without even realizing it. I basically didn't want to find myself to become like those UN officer who after a 4-year siege delivered mosquito nets against malaria in Daraya. Even if in Daraya there is no malaria, there's never been malaria. Those officers who over the past years allowed 71.5% of humanitarian aid to go to Assad-held areas, even if 99% of besieged areas in Syria are under the siege of his army and not under the siege of rebels. The UN, of course, says it's not on purpose, says that some areas simply is too risky, like Douma, for example, which is the town that 8 trucks bound to Kaf Batna, which is the next town, go regularly through, but it's too risky. So here I am for 4 years on here among those who have got from Syrians all the documents about humanitarian aid, about the way it was getting used to keep Assad in power, so that Assad could look like the only one able to govern Syria, to our key to stability, the lesser evil. Here I am among the journalists who have got all the documents in April 2013 with dozens of photos. We got all the maps, we got the routes, the list, we got what was being delivered and where and to whom. I'm among the journalists who strived to write about that, strived to write how you couldn't see a single bag of rice with the UN logo in Syria, and how instead you could see more and more Islamic charities everywhere, this black logo, this black flag, and how the only way to get bread, the only hope, was knocking at a mosque, kneeling down at the mosque, and I'm among those who were replied, how come 6,000 characters and nobody dies? And a man in Aleppo gave me his seat and gave me his life for all this. When I wake up, still today in the middle of the night, and all of you, really all of you, you say, oh, it's the trauma of Syria. No, it's the trauma of the world around Syria. It's not Syria. Last April, after 5 years and 500,000 deaths, a major Italian daily, La Repubblica, included Syria among the world's cheapest countries. You know, the countries where you can drop everything, start it all over, like Morocco, the Bermudas. This was the list, the kind of countries where you can open a cafe on the sea, you can be happy, barefoot in the sand. Who would have ever recommended Bosnia in the 90s? So now I come from the Balkans. I was in Kosovo, and the Japanese tourist the other day asked me, Aleppo? What's Aleppo? Then I read that she wasn't the only one. And a Spanish tourist said, oh, right, it was much better under Gaddafi. Now, we know the reason. We know the official justification is too dangerous. It's not our fault, no? It's you get into Syria and you get kidnapped and you get beheaded, you get killed. Syria is hell. Syria, to quote the title of a best-selling book, is the country of evil. But go read Martha Gellhorn, go read the Spanish Civil War, and go read Michael Herr, the Vietnam War, the First World War, Erich Maria Remarque, the Second World War, the Battle of Stalingrad, Vasily Grossman. What strikes me the most in the books I read is that whatever the war is, I always read of a war that looks like mine, that looks like Syria. Because war in the end basically never change. I mean, in war you die, that's all. You die, and it's randomly, you die. And Syria is widely believed to be the worst war ever, like the wildest war ever, the war where humanity hit rock bottom. But then you read Robert Fisk, you read Pity the Nation, and you realize that Lebanon was the same, including kidnappings and including beheadings. The only difference compared to Robert Fisk is that in Lebanon the war lasts 15 years, and we are only in our 5th. Syria is not the wildest war ever. We are the weakest journalists ever. And it's not because those like me get €100 per piece and we end up arriving, in Aleppo by tumbling a ride. And this is not a joke. Jim Foley, that day, because we were together, Jim Foley, that day, to return to Turkey, Jim Foley hailed a cab. But we are all vulnerable. So some of us more vulnerable than others, but basically we are all vulnerable. With kidnappings, the only way to enter Aleppo, to keep on entering Aleppo at some point, was to cover myself head to toe, hiding under a niqab and pretend to be Syrian. And it took a minute, honestly, to realize how wrong and how silly I was under my niqab. And when we reached Aleppo, and Ali, my translator, was introducing me to everybody as his cousin, and there was this little kid who kept on staring at me. Oh, she's not, he said to his man. She's not his cousin, she can't be. And he said, look at her hands, my fingers, too perfect with nail polish to be the fingers of a refugee. Many believe that the niqab, in this man's, being a woman, having the chance of hiding myself under a niqab, that the niqab has been my flak jacket, my bulletproof jacket, the hijab, the headscarf, my helmet. No, actually, because as Ali's sister explained to me immediately when we went back home that evening, of course I had my hands, wrapped in gloves, I would have always been unmistakable. No Syrian woman, she told me, has your eyes. You are used to walk with determination, you are used to walk with self-confidence. I mean, you are a Western woman, you look straight on. And she told me, you are used to feeling equal. There's no way you can mistake him for a Syrian. To be a woman, of course, I mean, sure, it helped a lot. This opportunity to blend in helped a lot. But if I'm still here, honestly, if I'm still alive, it's because I've been protected by Syrians. It's not the country of evil. And most of all, I've been protected by Syrian women. The countless times I was on the border, Turkish side of the border, waiting for it to open, because it's a weird border. The border crossing has no precise opening hours, so basically you might have to wait all the morning. And so the countless times that some ISIS militants who were patrolling the border noticed me at some point, and they started observing me, this strange refugee, lonely refugee with always, no enough mud on my clothes. And immediately, I was noticed immediately by the other woman, and they got it in a heartbeat. She's a foreigner. And they came next to me, 5, 6, 10 women, like a circle every time, and they started to chat with me in Arabic, even if I still speak a little Arabic. And really, every time they came next to me and they start chatting with me as if I were a sister, a friend, or as if I were a cousin, until the ISIS militants went away. And definitely Syria is not the country of evil. We think of our security, I'm not speaking only of journalists, we think of our security in military terms. We try to hire the best bodyguards, the best trained, the best equipped bodyguards. Even if in a war like Syria, in a war like Syria's war, and honestly many other today's wars, Libya, Iraq, Yemen, there are so many armed groups and so fragmented. The chain of command is so blurry, and the territory control, it shifts so quickly, and most of all so endlessly, that even if you are with the strongest militia, you are likely to come across a militia as powerful as yours, and you are likely to get in trouble very soon. When there are more than 2,000 armed groups around you, like in Syria, and most of all when around you there are criminal gangs and thugs of all sorts, the truth is that there is no armed protection that you can be shielded by. There is no armed protection. The only possible security is what I call social security, and this is the protection that comes not from barriers, not from walls, but on the contrary, it comes from relationships. Doesn't come from guns. It comes from people. And from the relationships you build day by day on the field, step by step, from your reputation, because you are safe not when you are strong, because you will never, never, never be strong enough. You are safe when you are respected, when you are esteemed, when you are welcome, and when you are sought for. When for Syrians, what you will write, what you will say is worth more than a $10 million ransom, what the world will know. And it's only a matter of time, nothing else. It's only a matter of time. It's not so difficult. It's a matter of walking and walking and walking around to meet, to be met, rather than, showing up when perhaps the US are about to bomb because Assad used chemical weapons, and then leaving after 3 days when the US decide not to bomb anymore because Assad, promised not to use chemical weapons, even if Syrians keep on getting killed by everything else. No, it's just a matter of time. It's just a matter basically of staying there. The point is that time today, that journalism for many of us is just a race, is to be the first to plant the flag on the moon. Even if honestly the word news comes from Latin, it stands for knowledge, not for new. So there is no such thing like new or old news. There are only significant or insignificant news. But the point is that the time today that journalism is a race, and not only journalism is a race, time is exactly what we don't have anymore. The point is, of course, seen in close up, the world is always much more complex and much more ambiguous. It's elusive. And sometimes, the more you know and the less you understand. But if you talk, and you talk and talk and talk, and you talk with whoever you come across, Anthony Shadid, the Washington Post correspondent, Middle East correspondent, was used to say, if you stay, he said, in the world's veils, in the end, you always get an idea of what's happening. And the first dispatch of his first Pulitzer Prize in 2004, it's a Pulitzer that he won for his coverage of the American invasion of Iraq, of what George W. Bush had just turned, mission accomplished. The first dispatch starts in Baghdad, on the bridge on the Tigris between Kadhimiya, is the site of the main Shia shrine, and Hadamiyya, which is the sign of the main Sunni shrine. It's just, there is a bridge in between. And at the time in Iraq, when Anthony Shadid was living there, in Iraq there were only Iraqis. There were no Sunnis and Shia, because nobody would have ever dared to ask you whether you were Sunni or Shia. It would be totally, unpolite and very rude. Shadid writes, this is the bridge that unites two Baghdads and divides two Iraqs. A few weeks earlier, we know the story, we all know the story now. The United States had just disbanded the army, disbanded Ba'ath, Saddam's party. So they had just left all the Sunnis, most of the Sunnis, once in power, with basically with no job, with no salary, penniless, but with a gun in their hands. So the United States, a few weeks earlier, had just triggered what, today we are used to call Islamic State, this long, long revenge that today goes under the name of Islamic State. And Shadid asks Sunnis, how do you see your future? And they say, we have no future. And so he writes, war is over. And this is the first dispatch of what will become his second Pulitzer Prize in 2010, a Pulitzer that he won for his coverage of the American withdrawal from Iraq. He writes, but the issue is, okay, war is over. The issue is, and now there's no victory. This is only a day after. And he writes, the end of a war in this day is, in this way, is only the preamble of a new war. On February 16, 2012, he was returning from Homs in Syria, and he died from an asthma attack. He was still in Syria. February 2012 is still, is the time of the demonstrations against Assad. Is the time when Assad is still claiming that there's nobody, that streets are actually empty, that it's all, it's been all staged by Al Jazeera. In his last piece, Shadid is really February 2012. Shadid writes of shootings, of kidnappings, of beheadings, of criminal gangs, of minorities on the run. Is the time when all of us, we were still drinking to democracy in Tunisia, democracy in Egypt, democracy in Libya, and Shadid soberly was writing, this is what all Syria and all the Middle East might become. What's really hard for a journalist, and this is really more than hard, actually, it's overwhelming, it's the awareness that all this could be avoided. And it took so little. That's the truth, really. It took so little. It really took so little to avoid all this. In the beginning, any war, any country seems confusing, seems elusive. Also, do you remember Bosnia better than me, of course, the Serb, the Croats, the ancient hatreds. My first MA, I studied with Antonio Cassese, the first president of the Hague Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, and of Bosnia. He said, well, if you don't understand it, it's because you didn't study enough. That's all. And wars are complex, are never complicated. To say that a war is complicated is the simplest of the excuses for doing nothing. And we all know that inaction in war is never inaction. Inactions mean means siding with the strongest and supporting the strongest. Syria is not confusing. At the end of the day, 5 years and 500,000 dead on, I'm still covering the same story. I'm still covering a struggle for freedom and dignity. And at the first ceasefire last February, the first hour of the first day of the first ceasefire, Syrians took back to the streets. Bony, messed up, exhausted, basically dead and decimated. They took back to the streets. And the only difference is that now, when they take back to the streets, they are against both Assad and Al-Qaeda, both Assad and Islamic State. But basically, I'm still covering the same story, and it's an easy story. It's a struggle for freedom and dignity. It's just a matter of time. Just a matter of time to get it. Of course, then it depends also on the way you spend, your time, because one day it was 2004, and again I'm going back to Anthony Shadid and the regime of Saddam Hussein that just been overthrown. And Shadid is with this young American soldier, is with specialist Stephen Harris, 20-year-old from Lafayette, Louisiana, who is on patrol in sector 37 north of Baghdad, and there is also another journalist with them. And basically, the soldier is reassuring, this other journalist, oh, don't worry. He says, don't worry at all, because everybody likes us here. And he says 90% of the people in this neighborhood, are with us. And Shadid follows just 50 meters behind, and he asks to a man who's just standing in front of the gate of his house. Shadid asks him, how do you see the US presence? And the man says, despicable. While most journalists covered Iraq embedded with Americans, and honestly not only out of logistical convenience, Shadid embedded with Iraqis. Seemingly, they were all in the same countries, but while specialist Stephen Harris was walking in sector 37 north of Baghdad, Shadid was walking in another country, in a neighborhood called Yarmouk. For the US at the time, for the United States, it was Operation Iraqi Freedom. For Saddam, it was the defining battle. And Shadid decided to stay among all the others, among the Iraqis trapped between the Western and the Arab rhetoric, among those who are always on the losing end, whatever the book you are reading is, whatever the war is. Shadid was among those for whom the war is just sukut, which means the collapse. This is the only Arab name you will hear for a war. There are no operations Iraqi freedom. There are no defining battle. It's always sukut, the ruin. You don't build social relationships just by living in Beirut rather than in London. Too many of us, and again, not only journalists, nearly all of us live among other journalists, among expats, among foreigners in these gated communities, golden communities, open only to a few upper-class locals who speak fluent English. There's nothing more useless. At that point, you can stay in London. And there's nothing more dangerous, because for those who, in the meantime, 5 minutes walk away, are hardly make a living, basically there is nothing more outrageous. For those who are in Sabra and Shatila, while you are in a cafe on the sea, and basically it seems the same Beirut is not. And then you claim that you are writing about their life, and do you really think you have any idea of what their life looks like? Baghdad must be covered from Baghdad, not from the green zone, not from the international zone. It was my first day in Iraq, and it was really the first day and the first evening. And I just noticed this man who was sleeping in the street with a blanket, with a pillow. And of course, I thought he was homeless. I thought he was one of the main displaced people, of the countless wars of the of these months. So I even dropped him some money. He was sleeping next to a gas station to be the first in line the following day, because in Iraq there is fuel enough only for the first 10, 20 comers in the morning. I mean, Iraq lies on oil fields. You just look around and you see drills everywhere. And then Iraqis have no fuel and have no electricity. If you want to understand Islamic State, just come to Baghdad. Just one day in Baghdad. Because there is actually a difference compared to the wars of the past. And the difference is that no matter who we are, what our ideas, our opinions are, no matter how harshly we have been criticizing George W. Bush, there's no point. All of us, seen from the Middle East, from this kind of the Middle East, all of us, we belong to the enemy camp. And there's no way. We belong to the 1% of, human beings who owns everything and controls everything, rules over everything. And basically, let me be very blunt, basically we are racist. We are racist and selfish and violent. And we belong to Europe where Denmark, which is, guys, Denmark is in the world, I think is the 10th richest country in the world. So basically, Denmark is taking away the gold necklaces of refugees who survive war and sea. And our jets, can roar unpunished in the Middle East skies. Airstrikes, really, no one knows anymore why they start, what the target is. And the point is, international law in this year is kind of vanished. And it's the jungle if you live in the Middle East. It's really the jungle, it's the law of the strongest. And why the hell in Yemen, in Pakistan, in Afghanistan, we should be respected. As our drones, in the meantime, turn wedding ceremonies into ashes, just because, they mistake for terrorists the relatives who are shooting in the air to celebrate the newlyweds. Under this point of view, it's true that I have nothing in common with, with Mary Colvin, who was covering Bosnia. Because basically the truth is that today we are engaged in the battle. And regardless of our ideas, when I was 24, I was still a university student. I was in Kosovo. I was an intern at the Embassy of Italy in Pristina. And I was, I was the odd one out. I was the activist of the student movement. And I was sure I had nothing to do with it. I had joined, all the rallies against NATO during the war in Kosovo. I also was the one who was illegally issuing visa to everybody. But then, as I was told by a beggar, when in the winter snow, with my leftist nice heart, I handed her out my scarf and gloves, because I'm very nice. And she told me, oh, if you wish to give me your gloves, she told me, you had to leave me my hand. And she uncovered her missing arm. And this was our humanitarian war. How can we pretend we have nothing to do with what's happening, to be a sort of third party? And it's not only about the Middle East, because I'm not only thinking of oil, of colonialism, post-colonialism, the Balfour Declaration, Sykes-Picot, and all these things far away in time. And, we have this tendency in the Middle East to blame for everything the Brits and the French. No, it's not only like that. There are two amazing journalists. One is French, Mathilde Villain, and another one is Italian, Stefano Liberti. And they shot a documentary on a story we are all familiar with, the Africans who work in slave-like conditions in the south of Italy, in our tomato fields. But then they went to the country where these Africans come from. They went to Ghana. And Ghana is a country whose economy is based on tomato, which goes unsold now because the European tomato, and especially the Italian tomato coming from the south of Italy, that Italians don't buy because we buy foreign tomato, but in Ghana they buy our tomato because basically it's cheaper. And so Italian tomato destroyed the economy in Ghana. Of course, do you really think it's cheaper because we are the best? I mean, because we are the most advanced, or because, I don't know, the Protestant ethics of capitalism? Basically, our tomato is cheaper because of the European Union subsidies, that's all. And because in our tomato fields, Africans work in slave-like conditions, that's all. Now, I mean, you can take, these guys, you can take even, the last gold necklace. You already took them everything. Along with, Syria and Iraq, we have a third stronghold of the Islamic State today, is Libya. And so, let's go bombing Libya. Now, half of the jihadists, more or less, about half of the jihadists in Libya come from neighboring Tunisia. I was in Tunisia last January. In Tunisia, it's impressive, 20 years old, all young men, today live for Libya or for Syria or for Iraq the same way in the past they were living for Lampedusa, for Italy, looking for a job. They don't want the caliphate, they just want a salary. And because Tunisia, again, is totally worn out, and its economy is based on tourism and agriculture. Now, tourism is dominated by foreign operators, by European operators, these low-cost, operators, which offer us, a week for 300 euro. And basically, when you pay 300 euro for a week, including the flight, for your holiday, I mean, sometimes when someone blows up, in your hotel or in your restaurant, just ask yourself how much your waiter is getting paid. Because this is tourism in Tunisia. And as for agriculture, agriculture in Tunisia faces the barrier of the European Union, our customs, basically. And as I was told by a young man who was an engineer, who was about to leave for Raqqa, he told me, your free market is your freedom to sell, our freedom to buy and to get in debt. Rather than, thinking of Libya, let's thinking of Brussels sometimes. And instead of, this idea of stepping into Libya, let's step into Brussels. It's, it's the only thing I'm asking this month. Islam. I'm asked to write about Islam, talk about Islam. A world where 62 billionaires own as much wealth as half of the world's population is a world doomed to fail, is a world that can't work. That's all. Instead of, focusing on the Quran, sometimes let's read Marx again, because that's the difference compared to the wars of the past. Today, none of us is innocent, and that's why none of us is immune. Many of us, actually, when we talk of our career, of our work as journalists, many of us, say, I'm driven by curiosity. That's not journalism. I mean, that's tourism. As Stanley Green, who is one of the best war photographers, says, I'm here to upset your mornings. Our role is not only to ask questions. Sometimes, many times, when you are on the field, you see that roles somehow there is, swap. And most of the times you are also the one who is expected to answer. And the point is that there is no journalism because there is no conversation if there is no exchange, no equal exchange, which means that you are asking strangers, total strangers, to talk, to disclose themselves, and it doesn't work if you are not ready to disclose yourself as well, to get into the game and to put yourself into the test, to question, basically, yourself and who you are and what you are doing, and to understand how much of you there is in what you see around. Because journalism, this is another stereotype. It's not only a window on the world. Those who write and also those who read, honestly, those who take a photo and also those who take a look. Basically, none of us, actually, neither I nor you, is really ever out of the frame. Journalism is somehow always together a window and a mirror. And even if you are just reading, even if you are just looking, and this doesn't mean that you are simply a bystander. And most of all, you are asking people to speak and to speak out. You are asking people to expose themselves, most of the times under their real name. You are asking them to run a risk for their words, for your piece. It doesn't work if you are not the first one to speak out, to run a risk. And honestly, I don't understand what's the point of writing about human rights in, I don't know, in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, in Iran, in Russia, in China, if you don't write also about human rights in your own backyard. What kind of reputation do you think you can earn with this, double standard? Today, 80% of the news, newspapers, television, radio, internet, all together, 80% of the news in all the world come from freelancers like me, without any right at all. We work underpaid for 1, 2, 3 years until, in the hope of getting a staff position, until our bank account goes into the red, and then we are immediately replaced by another wannabe war journalist. And that's all. This is what journalism is today. But no one says anything. No one, because we are too busy, about speaking out against the Taliban in Afghanistan or about everything. And a journalism that keeps silence on its wrongdoings, where is its moral legitimacy for pointing the finger and for speaking of the others' wrongdoings? Editors always tell you, oh, you know what, we have no money. And they say, oh, is the globalization, is the, the transition to digital journalism. And it's complicated, of course. They say, oh, this is the final crisis of capitalism. I'm so sorry for you. This is the decline of Western civilization. Well, the general manager of Italy's state broadcaster, Antonio Campo Dall'Orto, gets 650,000 euros per year. So it's not complicated. And you have got it right, it's 6 million kron. It's not complicated at all. And there is a red line for me. I'm not only defending my rights as a worker. There is a red line beyond which it makes no sense anymore, beyond which journalism makes no sense anymore. You were asking, if I think the title of this evening is How We Contribute to Peace. We might also say how we contribute to war. Because the point is, my red line is when all this exploitation that you can't see because nobody speaks out, when all this ends up affecting not only the journalist, not only the dignity and the rights of the author of the story, but also the dignity of the subject of the story. And that's for me the red line when all these hidden aspects of journalism end up misleading the story. So now, a few weeks ago, I watched this video, a video on refugees, a video from Greece, not to pay a translator. The journalist basically walked around the camp. It was an informal camp in Greece, and walk around looking for the only English speaker of the camp. Now, I might even hold, a PhD in astrophysics. If you just, after 3 months on the move, when I'm angry, I'm totally, dead tired, and you hunt me with your camera, and you just put a microphone in front of my nose, and, you ask me, oh, please, can you briefly tell me your opinion on the Schengen Treaty, possibly in Arabic? Of course, I will probably look like a cave dweller anyway, even if I have a PhD. The point is, I will look to you, to all of us, because I was watching the video, I'm not only a journalist, I'm also, just a citizen. I will look like somebody that, will be a terrible challenge to turn this girl into something useful, to find her a job in our countries. I mean, this girl basically looked like a burden for our welfare state and nothing else. This girl in this way just looked like a terrible problem. And refugees instead, since I'm living now with refugees are the opposite. They have, countless resources, countless projects, countless ideas. They have boundless energy. And they are strong, they are hard driving, hard-headed, and they are basically amazing. And they are not a burden, they are not a problem. And all this why? Because you can't afford a translator. Too many of the journalists who went missing in Syria, now let's say the uncomfortable truth, were just young, unexperienced, and too unexperienced journalists who just threw themselves into the fray, and they were hitching on Facebook a ride to Aleppo. And for me, this is the red line. Because then that's the way Syria becomes the country of evil. When everybody gets kidnapped, but you don't know how they got kidnapped. That's the point. I'm not speaking, of course, of The Guardian, of Le Monde, or Der Spiegel, the few still standing, of the New York Times, but I'm speaking of all the others. Because when nearly all the contents of newspapers come from freelancers like me, which means, underpaid 20-somethings, who don't cover what they think they should cover, it would be important to cover, basically what they can cover, what they can afford to cover. And suddenly, they swarm all together to Ukraine, not because Ukraine is the new Bosnia, which is what we were reading at all, but because at the time Ukraine was the only feasible war. There was nothing else around because, in those months there wasn't Libya at the time, there wasn't Yemen, Syria was off limits, there wasn't Iraq, there wasn't Islamic State. Also Ukraine, it was cheap. And also you don't need any visa to enter Ukraine, because how you can apply for a visa if nobody, not to be accountable, if something happens to you, is willing to give you, to sign an accreditation letter? Do you think that we don't want to go to Yemen? Simply we can't get an accreditation letter and we can't apply for a visa to Yemen, and that's why Yemen is not covered. So we all went to Ukraine at some point, and there was the Sudan, there was the Central African Republic, there was Ethiopia. It's not that we didn't know, and it's not that we didn't want. Basically, it's simply there was Eritrea, was another crisis. The point is that we couldn't. We just couldn't, and we all went to Ukraine. We all moved to Ukraine, and the result was that every day. Of course, I'm speaking of the first weeks of the Ukraine crisis. So suddenly, every day there were hundreds of articles, hundreds of photos from Ukraine coming out from Ukraine. Every bullet basically turned into, hit the headlines, and every death became a massacre, every massacre became a genocide. And basically, rather than covering the war to help somehow stopping the war, what we did in Ukraine was fueling the violence and boosting the violence. And Ukrainians were really, both sides were really hating us. I mean, never more, I swear to myself, never more a war like Ukraine. I will never do something like that in my life. Because, if this is what newspapers are today, the crisis is not of readership. We say, readers don't buy newspapers anymore at all. I mean, readers are bright, readers are smart. Why they should buy newspapers this is what newspapers are today. Because then, be careful. If newspapers don't pay, what do you think? Who is gonna pay? Because sometimes somebody's paying for journalism. Well, the NGOs and the UN agencies. Today our assignments come basically from NGOs and from UN agencies, which is why when you read of Gaza, you read only these, positive and comforting stories of Palestinians who, despite it all, which means despite the war, despite the hunger, despite it's been nearly 10 years that they've been living under siege, that they've been, they don't even have drinking water anymore, only seawater, salt water. You feel, I don't know if you've ever been to Gaza, you feel sticky all the days for years. And then there is an F-16 now and then, comes and bombs. It comes and you die. This is Gaza today. But what you read, basically, is you read about the new surf school. You read about there is a new famous coffee blend. And the parkour boys, there is another famous man who carved a swimming pool out of the rubble. Another amazing story about the dinosaurs of a new theme park. Then all Palestinians in the evening take these tramadol pills. Is a painkiller for dogs, which is the local version of ecstasy, because that's, the best thing you can do in Gaza. You take it and sleep and you forget. But what you will read is, how Palestinians get fun among the new dinosaurs founded by some of our NGO. For one story on our tomato fields on Ghana, for one story of migrants trapped for years in one of the detention centers that the European Union is funding in Libya, for one story like that, you read 999 stories of rescues at sea. Why? Donate. Donate, ladies and gentlemen, because this is the white man's burden. NGOs pay and awards pay. This is true especially for photographers. So at noon, feel free to bomb everything and everyone. No photographer will ever come because the light at noon is too strong. To win the Baye Calvados, under its entry rules, you can read the entry rules. You don't need that your work is constant over time, that your readers understand what's going on in Syria day by day. What you need for your story is really just risking your life. To win a Baye Calvados, Syria doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is the front line. And as my first translator in Aleppo, Abdallah warned me, if you write only of fighters, only of guns, any revolution will turn into a war. And of course he's dead now, because everybody's dead in Syria, except for Assad. I know it sounds weird, but covering the front line is the easiest thing, because basically you must just come back alive. But anyone, if he's back with a stunning story. The point is that war is not a front line. A war is whatever is behind the front line, around the front line. A war is everything else. A war is what generates a front line. Maybe you have seen this famous picture taken a few months ago by Bülent Kilic, famous picture taken from Turkey, from the border, from a hilltop during the battle for Kobane, and it's US airstrikes on Kobane. And this photo has been taken with a giant telephoto lens. And there is this big cloud of dust, and then there is this jihadist running away. It's a small jihadist. It's basically a black silhouette running away. And this is journalism today. It's not just a photo, it's a metaphor, I think. And this is the only prize, honestly, they should deserve. It's a metaphor of journalism today, because basically you can see it's only black silhouette. Do you really believe that jihadists are all insane? All just butchers, that they don't have any reason, any motivation, any background, that they are all like, Jihadi John, just crazy guys. Because I think it would be a little bit like, like believing that all the Marines are, Abu Ghraib. And it would be a bit insane to think about that. Now, how many of you know that the Maldives Islands, are the non-Arab country with the highest number per capita of foreign fighters, of Islamic State militants? Before that, how many of you know that the Maldives Islands are a Muslim country, a Salafi country, with women cover with a niqab more than in Saudi Arabia? I've been now a month in Malé, the capital city of the Maldives. I'm just back. This is what I was doing. It looks like, I don't know, like Naples, like, Gomorrah, It's heroin, it's criminality, it's corruption, it's Salafism, it's conservative Islam, it's an impressive poverty. Tourism revenues in the Maldives amount to $3.5 billion per year. It all goes to 4 or 5 profiteers, connected, of course, with some good friends in the government. The majority of the islands are only for tourists. And so Malé, the capital city, has 300,000 people in 2 square miles. And Maldivians live, really, it's not a joke, lives 15 in a room. And Maldivians all have a son, a brother, a cousin. They all have a neighbor in Syria. They're not black silhouette. If you live outside the green zone, which is not only a district of Baghdad, honestly, I think that the green zone is a state of mind. If you live with the wretched of the heart, what's really striking, I'm sorry to tell you, what's really striking, seen from the Middle East I'm living with, is not that there are so many jihadists around, is that there are still a few jihadists. I've read many books on the Islamic State, of course, in these months, and I think one of the best books is the book by Hasne Seierstedt, is the book on Anders Breivik, because it's a book, of course, I guess that most of you read it. It's a book for me. I'm not Norwegian. It's a book always on the brink somehow until the last page, like probably the mind of Anders Breivik. I mean, like Anders Breivik himself, because basically, the point, of course, we all know what's the point, what we want to understand. He was crazy, he was naff, or not. And basically, when you have this young man who plans a civil war that should end, in 2083 after the execution of all traitors, I mean, what his plans were better than me. Basically, of course, he looks crazy. And because also that's the only thing we can be comforted by, the idea that he's crazy. And he knew it very well when, he defied the psychologists who were claiming that he's unfit to plead, during the trial, and he said, under your criteria, all priests would be crazy, as they pretend they've got God's calling. I mean, for me, as a non-Norwegian, the story of Anders Breivik was really impressive. I mean, this idea that sometimes suddenly it looks rational, and then, I mean, come on, it's not. And you are always on the brink, and you can't understand until the end. And of course, it's the only thing we can be comforted by, that is not one of us. And so the jihadist is exactly the same. I mean, the only thing we can be comforted by, the idea that they are just insane, they are just butchers, just killers, that they have no motivations, no reasons. And, it would be much better if they remain only black silhouette, like in that picture. And it's really better because how much, they can reveal about us. When Vasily Grossman has to be sent to Stalingrad during World War II, all the other journalists in the newsroom, the other journalists objected that he had no war experience, and the chief editor said, I don't care if he's not an arms expert, a weapons expert. He said, I need an expert of the human soul. Many of us today are driven by adrenaline, by desire for adventure, and we are all equipped with the most powerful telephoto lens, with the latest, infrared lamp, all these things. And the war theater in this way sometimes, just turn into a theater and nothing else. We have this dispatch built on characters, basically, not persons. We have, the displaced, the woman, the child, the old man, the jihadist. We have the victim and the executioner. We have the right and the wrong. It's black and white, or here or there, or with us or against us. And instead, the point is that what you really need on a front line, you don't need anything except for grace, except for one thing. Persons must be persons and not characters, and that's all. I'm often asked, which is the story, I'm most proud of. And honestly, what I'm proud the most in these years, I really feel ashamed to be here today because I wouldn't deserve to be here. And the point is that in these years, when for Syria, we have been winning awards over awards, and not only the war is still going on, but basically readers still barely know where Syria is. I'm serious when I say that I will remember these years as the worst years of my life. What I'm proud of most, basically, is what I decided not to write in these years. I remember one story. The rebel fighter who was filmed as he was eating the liver of a dead enemy, and the video went viral. It was clearly the story of a psychopath. It was like trying to explain America through the serial killer of Milwaukee. But in that moment, when the UN were trying to understand if was the case of stepping in, like in Libya, or giving weapons to rebels, what to do, there was the UN Security Council in session. In that moment, that story convinced everybody that rebels were simply murderers, and that Assad was the best choice, and that guy was just a psychopath and nothing else. For me, you judge a journalist's value from what he doesn't write, and you judge a photographer from the photo he refuses to take. And it's like now with all these portraits of jihadists that you can read on all newspapers. We have the one, who has got Islam for Dummies at the airport. We have the one who is missing Nutella on the front line. There is another famous one who was missing, the washing machine. Basically, we have all these portraits. All these jihadists described as nuts. I don't understand why nobody is meeting the jihadists I'm meeting, those who have studied Kant. The Islamic State in this way seems to be absolutely evil. And basically all its political, economic, and social roots, all the collusion, all the complicity from the outside, all the, the minor things like for how long, the ISIS bases weren't bombed. I remember, in Aleppo, the ISIS headquarters was the only place not to be bombed. Still today, still standing. All these things get lost, of course, because it's like our coverage of the Islamic State is just crime news. It's for us, it's just a bunch of butchers, because in the end, it's useful. It's very useful, because in this way, the Islamic State is our ideal enemy. It's really a perfect enemy. It's the vague enemy, against everything is permitted against the Islamic State. We have this endless state of emergency where where everybody, with the pretext of this common war on terrorism, can pursue its own goals and its own interest. Basically, we can bomb everything and everywhere, and we can fight our own wars just under the pretext of this, strange enemy nobody knows, called Islamic State. The point is, despite it all, they believe in us. In Aleppo, in Benghazi, in Baghdad, in Kabul, they give you their seat, and they give you their life to let you write and to let the world know. When I was preparing this speech, I thought for long about the first thing I told you about the old man, because it's not easy. I'm living somehow. It's not a nice thing to say. I'm living on borrowed time. There is somebody who died basically for the book that you have in your hands. And the point is, they believe in us. I went to Hebron last year for this sort of intifada, and I guess that you all know Hebron. Hebron is the only city where Israelis or Israeli settlers, instead of living apart in Jewish-only communities, Jewish-only areas, in Hebron they live scattered among Palestinians. It's the only city where Israelis and Palestinians are basically live side by side. The result is that, every family owns a walkie-talkie. In the living room, the same way we have the flower pots, they have this walkie-talkie that, every 20, 30 minutes gives the news of a new dead or stabbings, shooting, clashes, and attacks of all sorts. In Hebron, no one asks, who is the dead. They wonder directly what the reprisal will be, so where the next dead will be. This is Hebron, and I went there for Yediot Ahronot, which is Israel's main newspaper, and which had never had its own correspondence among Palestinians. At the beginning, I was a bit nervous, honestly. Even if I work for the Palestinians, with Palestinians I feel at home, but so I remember I arrived in Hebron at noon. I arrived as usual in Hebron in the middle of chaos, in the middle of a demonstration. So there was the army. The army was firing everything at us. And then there was this young man covered with a keffiyeh and Molotov in his hands. And then he came by and he said, you are the one who's writing for Israel? I said, no. Absolutely not. I said, no, I'm not. The journalist you're looking for has just left. She's blonde. She was here, but she's just left. And then I said, you never know what he's gonna say. Maybe he has something to say. So I said, I write for an Italian newspaper. Do you have anything to say? And the guy looked at me, really disappointed. And then he said, an Italian newspaper? Oh no, thank you. I need to talk with Israelis, not with Italians. And he went away. I think honestly, this is the most covert conflict ever. And no other country in the world has more journalists per square meter. Yet after 70 years, the point is that, still Israelis have a scant idea of who the Palestinians are. And when you say, it's funny, when you say that you have been in the West Bank or, God forbid, you have been in Gaza, that, for Israelis is a little bit like you have been in the Bin Laden's cave. So you say, oh, Gaza. And basically you are asked all these strange questions because they ask you whether there are cafes or restaurants in Ramallah, whether there are washing machines, bikes. They ask you, whether the streets are paved. Really, also well-read Israelis, sometimes even university professors, it's really strange. You are asked, of course, if you have to wear a hijab, because they believe it's a little bit like Iran. And you already know, when you talk with Israelis, you are ready to speak about, to lecture them on the Balfour Declaration, Sykes-Picot, and the Sunnis and the Shia. The point is that you are never asked of politics, of Hamas and Fatah. You are asked of daily life, basically. You are asked of traffic lights, because they all know perfectly the Balfour Declaration. They all know, perfectly the history, of course, of the conflict. What they want to know if men talk to you. They say, oh, really? Even if you're a woman? Then, I'm not joking, because, how many of you did know that the Maldives Islands are a Muslim country, even if there is, globalization and this idea that this is a global village and we don't know anything about each other. So I was in Hebron for nearly 2 months, and everybody, both Israelis and Palestinians, everybody was ringing me up, was WhatsApping me, emailing me, stopping me in the street for a tea, sometimes just giving me a cake. Oh, it's been killed a Palestinian, let's celebrate. Oh, it's been killed an Israeli, let's celebrate. So this is Hebron. But anyway, they all wanted to be interviewed, and it was moving at some point. They all had a message, a statement, a story that I had to bring for them on the other side of the wall. Because in the end, what is most surreal is that this is the outcome, this situation is the effect of war. Not of war, but of peace. It's the effect of the Oslo agreements because, before the Oslo agreements, basically Israelis and Palestinians somehow, I don't want to say that, yes, maybe they were living together, not on an equal footing, you know what I mean. I mean, there were trade ties, there were business relationships, and now that there is peace instead, you know, between Israelis and Palestinians, there is a wall. And so when I got this phone call from Yediot Ahronot, I said, yes, of course. Because Yediot Ahronot is Israel's most popular newspaper, is the first one. And because it's never had its own correspondent among the Palestinians. Honestly, of the many newspapers I write for me, Yediot Ahronot is my newspaper. Because I think that sometimes journalism can be more than journalism. And the times, you know, the times that, it's not complicated, the times journalism does what the two sides, by definition, are quite unable to do, which is to look at themselves from the standpoint of the other side. And this is what I was asked for by Yediot Ahronot. Honestly, I don't write for giving answers, solutions. I just write to tell. I write basically to leave you with two questions where you had just one question only. You know, I'm always said by other journalists, so, you know, writing for Yediot Ahronot is more dangerous than going to Syria. Well, yes. So what? What's the point of being brave enough for Syria? For the front line? What's the point of, for me, I mean, what's the point of being ready to risk your life for war and not to risk your life for peace? Look, I have a ring on, two rings actually. This one. Two rings that I've never take off. Never means not even in Syria. Never means not even when I'm with jihadists. Most of my times I'm with jihadists. These are Jewish rings. Because the point is that I work on jihadists, I work with jihadists. I try to understand their reasons, I try to understand their motivation, that's my job. But the point is that's my Middle East. It's a Middle East where, you know, Beit, Arabic and Hebrew share the same word to say home. And that's what courage is for me. I mean, it's not, courage is not, you know, you don't need courage to win a Baye Calvados. You need courage to write for Yediot Ahronot and to stay just in the middle. That's what courage is for. Because despite it all, I believe in journalism. Of course I believe in journalism because I'm Italian. I come from a country where before killing a judge or a policeman or a trade unionist, the mafia usually tries to understand, sometimes there are real polls. The mafia tries to understand if and how and for how long the press will cover the murder. In Italy, mafia dons says, is very famous, they say, it's better a life sentence than media attention. Because basically words don't describe, words create. The report I'm attached the most, actually, is not a war report. It's my very first report, the first thing I publish as a journalist. Because, you know, I told you, it makes no sense to defend human rights in Afghanistan, in Iran, in China, in Iraq, if then you are unable to defend human rights in your own backyard. So my first reportage is a reportage on the Ilva plant of Taranto. Taranto is a city, is a 1 hour's drive from the city where I was born. And this Ilva plant is the largest, Europe's largest steel plant, which means also that is the most polluting. Taranto is completely pink of iron dust. And in Taranto there is dioxin also in the cheese, also in the fish. And in Taranto you have 2,000 dead every year of cancer related to the steel plant. Because, you know, wars then in the end are not only those with guns and tanks and jets. Basically, those are the easiest war to see. Just death. Now, without that investigative report, and honestly, without all the investigative reports that followed, because in the end, journalism is not an individual, adventure. It's a joint endeavor always. Without the media inquiries, without the media work, we would have never had the judicial work and the judicial inquiries. So basically, I don't think that my role is change the world. None of my dispatches will ever stop the war in Syria. I don't have any illusion. But wars create, and what they create is public space. The space where citizens, political parties, trade unions, governments, diplomats, stakeholders, the space where they can step in. Jan Egeland can step in, because things exist only when they are told, and basically only when they exist, things can be changed. This is what my role is. And as Roberto Saviano says, words don't affect power, but responsibility. Because the point is that once you have seen, you can't unsee. Once you have seen, whatever your choice is, can be speaking out, can be keeping silent, can be doing nothing or stepping in. Once you have seen, basically, you are accountable. You're accountable whatever your choice is. And when you read, when you look at, it doesn't mean that you are just a bystander. So now, I know that the first question from the floor will be why you keep on staying in Syria. So the point is, why? Where do you think, all of you, where do you think you are? We are all in Syria. Stay here.
Thank you, Francesca. Journalism is both a window and a mirror. You have shown us both how it is a window and a mirror, and you have not shied away from using that mirror to also shine a light on all of us here, on your own profession, journalism, and even on yourself. We'll be returning to that. We have now been joined by Robert Mood. Robert has recently joined PRIO, where he is now engaged in a number of different things, including a research project on military interventions in the Middle East. Robert is a retired Lieutenant General who most recently served as the Norwegian military representative to NATO at the headquarters in Brussels. But as importantly, in this context, he has long experience from the Middle East and from Syria in particular, where he, amongst other things, led the unarmed United Nations supervision mission during its 90 days mandated period back in 2012. He is also a well-known personality in the Norwegian debate on a whole range of issues. And Robert, I'd like to start out with you. You've been operating in Syria with admittedly a difficult task at your hands back in 2012, and in that situation you certainly related to the media debate. Does any of the representation that Francesca conveys here resonate with the ways in which you experienced the media? Was it a help? Was it a threat? Was it both?
Well, thank you very much, and I'd like to begin briefly by saying that when reading the Norwegian version of La Guerra Dentro, it was extremely familiar to read your stories from inside Syria, the way you describe the Syrian identity, the way you describe the challenges, and the way you reflect upon the role of journalism. So many politicians and decision makers should read this book, indeed. 3 points may be related to the way we experienced journalism during this period in 2012, a few months before you came down, Francesca. The first one was maybe that we were engaged in dialogues with the opposition, also with the key elements of the government, all the way into the inner parts of the inner circles. And when we believed that we had maybe something to work on late at night. We very, on several occasions, woke up in the morning and the headlines in Le Monde or in New York Times or in other international media, CNN, BBC World, was very often very one-dimensional. The butcher characteristics of the individual in Damascus and the generals surrounding Bashar. Now, he deserves that for other reasons, but the point was, I'm sure that Mrs. Clinton and the other players at that time, they also reflected upon the situation in Syria, but what was quoted in the media was these very direct negative characteristics of the individuals involved in trying to move towards a political solution on the ground. And then all the doors closed, and we went back to zero again. So that was one experience with journalism in this context. Now, the second one would be for me to argue that we had massacres and situations where the big challenge was to get facts on the ground out, and obviously another part of the story to brief facts to the Security Council. But in these circumstances, in particular the local journalists, they were extremely helpful in getting pictures and getting, let's say, what we would call in this context big data from the events on the ground. Could I also say that I think it's fair to also reflect on whether journalism can contribute to starting, let's say, military campaigns at the wrong time, because journalism with the most graphic pictures where all of us click, or at least most of us click, stimulate the urge of Western politicians to do something more for domestic reasons than because they have a comprehensive plan for first the military part of it and then what comes after. Just a few hours ago, I discussed with a special operations community a few meters from this venue their role. And you might find it interesting in this context that we challenged for several hours the job of what we called battlefield forensics, getting the facts out. Because there is a reasoning that maybe the fact that you can hide behind anonymity in front of for example, the UN Security Council, we cannot pinpoint exactly who did what in what circumstance, makes these conflicts go on and go on. It might have been easier, for example, in 2012, just before you came down, Francesca, if we had been able to pin the red label on exactly the right individuals. And the agreement among the soft communities that this is where we have a role to play together with the other actors in the big pictures. And to conclude, maybe say that from a military point of view, we agreed during these months, and in particular at the end of these months inside Syria, that this is probably more a battle of perceptions than a battle of weapons.
Thank you. Thank you, Robert. I wonder, Francesca, if we can take you directly to some of the things you said about journalism and the role of journalism. And many of your statements were strong and certainly food for thought. And you said sometimes journalism is more than journalism, and you referred to your newspaper. My Hebrew pronunciation is not perfect, I realize that. The Yediot Ahronot. And you said that there are times when it does connect between the two sides, by definition, is able to bring the standpoint of the other into the comprehension of the one. And in your work in Syria, where most of the commentary we see virtually seem to assume that bridge building is simply not possible. Do you see yourself as a bridge builder, as a builder of mutual understanding also in that context?
Yes, definitely. Each of us, not only journalists, each of us, I mean, as Western citizens, because basically this is the, this is the clash now. Of course, I'm not going back to the clash of civilizations, this kind of things. But the point is that clearly, all of us, we belong to this part of the world. I'm speaking, so it's not only Syria, but basically because Syria now is jihadist. Jihadists are the main actor in the opposition, at least inside Syria. Then outside Syria, Syrians are most seculars. But the point is that what I'm covering now, it's Syria in the context of the Middle East, and not only, as the Maldives Islands show. So basically, I'm with jihadists. So when I speak with jihadists, the point is that I'm somehow, even if I don't want to, I'm a symbol for them of the West. They call it like that. For them, I'm just the West. Most of the times, it sounds strange, but I am the first person they can really meet, they can really talk to, because one thing is, just to exchange 2 words with a foreign tourist or with something. Another thing is having a foreign journalist with you for hours, for days, for weeks. And this is what I see every day, that basically now, I was thinking exactly about this 2-3 days ago. Maybe you heard about the Italian doctoral student who was killed in Egypt, Giulio Regeni. He disappeared and was found dead. So, of course, as Italian journalists, we work a lot on this case. There was a TV program, in Egypt. Journalists, are quite in danger, and in general in the Middle East and the Arab world. Let's think of Turkey. Journalists are not particularly, welcome by governments. So whoever is in power, they don't like journalists, and they don't think that journalism is important, and they are not used to think about the role of. If you speak with Erdogan, he's not used to think that a free media can have a positive role. It's something. The media are the enemy because they think media are propaganda. This is the way of those who are in power in the Middle East now, and also those like many jihadists. The point is, when we were working on this case, we were working basically with the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, because you can imagine that is the easiest source, since they are trying to overthrow Al-Sisi. So it was very easy to use them as a source and to get information through them. Because they have all the interest to help journalists, and the Muslim Brotherhood is not properly friendly with journalists. What happened is that there was this TV program last week in Italy. It's one of our best TV programs, very professional and everything. The Muslim Brotherhood got it translated into Arabic with the subtitles and everything, and then we got this phone call saying, you're really doing an amazing job. We didn't think that this could be the role of the media. I didn't work in this program, so I'm not, talking about myself. This is exactly what journalists, but also what NGOs, whoever is a foreigner now in this part of the world can do. Because basically, these journalists who were working on this case, on this Regeni case, they show that when you are really professional. They were very correct, very honest, and so the Muslim Brotherhood was starting to think, that maybe having a free, independent press makes sense sometimes. And this is something too, not only for journalists. That's why, the point is that each of us now, in this particular moment, we represent basically all the world we come from, and most of the times we are the only person that these kind of people see and meet. Is the first time that they can really understand. Still today, most jihadists are surprised when they listen to me, when I criticize, I can criticize the United States, I can criticize Western culture, because they don't think that it's something totally normal for us. This idea really that with globalization we know each other is totally stupid.
Robert, I want to pick up on a slightly different topic. The kind of I think I'd use the term empathy that you practice. You really try to understand the inner drivers of the actions of people with whom you may fundamentally disagree or not even sympathize, but you try to convey that understanding. And I remember 7-8 years ago, you and I, we were on a panel at the Nansen School in Lillehammer discussing Norway's engagement in Afghanistan, and I thought you went to the extreme when you argued that you wanted every single soldier that you were responsible for sending to the war front of knowing Afghan culture as if it was the inside of his or her own pocket. I didn't find that entirely realistic, but the point here is that you have really been a proponent of that cultural understanding. Has the kind of accounts that Francesca brings to the fore been fundamentally useful for you in pursuing that understanding?
Indeed. That's why I argue that many politicians and decision makers, whether in uniform or without uniform, should read the book. We are committing terrible mistakes as we speak in the Middle East and in other places because we are not familiar with the culture. One example in the context of what we have just heard is that if you go back to the periods I stayed in Syria before March 2011, and I came back to Norway, and I was briefing or discussing and telling Norwegians that this is a secular, well-educated society where they have fairly equal opportunities, and they even have a well-developed healthcare system and sort of a welfare state. It's sort of a contract between this regime with all its negative aspects and the population. As long as we have this, we will tolerate the torture, prisons, and all the rest of it. And then the Syrian identity was the idea that this was possible among the Syrians. And that pride, that dignity, the integrity, the compassion, but also uncompromising emotions that was there among Syrians is something that you need to understand without going into the long historic lines of all the rest of it that they carry on their sleeve. So reflective journalism, like what we are being handed by Francesca, is crucial to build that base, and from that to have an intelligent conversation for both decision makers and others who go there.
Thanks. We have to turn to Syria a little bit as well. And Francesca, you said what's really hard, and I'm now citing you, what's really hard for a journalist, really overwhelming, is the awareness that all this could be avoided. That it took so little. Really, it took so little. And I'd like to hear from both of you, where should it have been tackled differently? Where could it have taken a different course? And who would have been in a position to make sure that that other course was taken? It's a tall conflict. It's a tall question, and I don't expect you to give a lecture on it, but just some early reflections.
The most painful thing is that maybe you think this is a difficult question. No, it's an easy question. Because what really surprised me always, even in these days, of this ceasefire, which is not a ceasefire, as a former mediator, because that was my job 4 years ago, there always been a window of opportunity for a peace agreement in Syria, always, and there is still today. Basically, from one reason, which is what he was saying. One of our main mistakes as journalists at the beginning, because especially at the beginning we were just young. I mean, all the coverage of Syria, of course you don't know this, but we were just 10, 15 young freelancers. It was our first time in Syria. Still today, I've never been in Damascus in my life, so can you imagine, The point is that at the beginning, when we were seeing, and we were not in Syria, we were covering Libya, we were covering Egypt, Tunisia, we were watching on YouTube these demonstrations in Damascus. Now, I mean, you know that I have no sympathy for Assad, but I have to admit that now I think that we were a bit wrong. I think that we were somehow thinking that, you know, the opposition was stronger than it actually was in Syria. And what really we totally missed was the economic and social divide, was this opposition between the countryside, rural Syria, and urban Syria, which is unfortunately also overlapping with the Sunni-Shia divide. All these things that now are quite clear to me, at the beginning was totally, you know, nobody knew everything. So the point is that Syrians have always been, in every stage of the war, quite ready for compromise, especially at the beginning. It's exactly because of what he was saying, that, you know, this agreement, this silent agreement between the population and the state, the idea that, okay, you give me a little bit of order and law and a little bit of social services. You know, the idea of state, this is another thing that we usually forget. The idea of what a state is in the Middle East is totally different from our European idea of a state. Totally different. I mean, what is really strange, and this becomes from the Ottoman Empire, this becomes not only from Islam, comes also from colonialism. What people in the Middle East expect from a government is totally different from what we expect from a government. Because basically, if you are an Arab still today, you expect that your problems, your needs get addressed by your family and your tribe at local level. You don't think of the government, which is still today in Baghdad. If you ask Iraqis, oh, but who is the mayor of Baghdad? Nobody knows. Okay, but if there is a problem, I mean, a pipeline, the water lines, I mean, what you're going to do? Oh, I'm calling, you know, for every problem there is a family. I'm going to call him. And I mean, it's something totally difficult to understand for us, even so for practical things. So the point is that the expectation were not so high. And that's why Syrians were ready for compromise now, for example. I mean, of course there is a big window of opportunity, because it's true that now we have jihadists particularly strong, and since, you know, we see things in advance, I'm not speaking of the Islamic State, what we see now is Al-Qaeda strong and not Islamic State, while, you know, everybody's thinking the opposite. The point is that also many jihadists now are ready for an agreement, all the moderate jihadists. Ready for an agreement for many reasons, because another thing that we are not used to think, you know, is a career soldier. So probably if I ask you what is a victory for you, you will never tell me, oh yes, maybe I can win in 4 generations. For you, it's not a victory. Ask Israelis, they will tell the same. You know, and for an Israeli, you can have, you know, they have another idea of time. I mean, for me, when Arabs and jihadists tell me, oh, you know, who cares? Even if we stop, ask Hamas. You know, they can stop the war even for 60 years and think that this is a victory, because then, you know, the idea of time for them starts with the prophet, with everything. It's another idea of time. So basically today, many jihadists, I'm speaking of jihadists I'm talking with in these days, they say, okay, we can stop fighting now, which doesn't mean that they are surrendering, but they can stop fighting even for 20 years. Because the idea of victory is quite different from what, I mean, we think. So they when they think about how is going jihad, they tell me, oh, look in the long term or in the mid-term. 20 years ago, when you were a child, there were no cover women in Europe. Now it's normal. Now we have burkinis and everything. You know, for them, look, it's not a stupid consideration. If you think in the long term, now Muslims are a presence in Europe. This is what they see when they tell me Paris one day will be as Muslim as Baghdad is, and they say, please, you know, tell me, at least decide before I buy a house in Paris, because, you know, I don't want to move to Paris and then buy a house and you get Sharia law. This is what all of them think. They don't think in 5 years it will be Muslim, but in this long term that for us, secular persons, this totally makes no sense, because for me, if you say in 1 century it will be Muslim, okay, so I can move to Paris, I mean, who cares? But this is the way they are thinking.
Robert, where do you think the main missed opportunities were, and who was it that should have acted upon them?
Yeah. In the spirit of hindsight, well, I'll offer three reflections. Number one is that looking back at the Kofi Annan proposal and the technical agreement that we negotiated in good faith in Damascus in April 2012, and that was partly implemented in the beginning, and then what happens after. We were not ready for that battle of perceptions. We did not have the tools, and with we, I'm not only talking about the roughly 300 individuals who were inside Syria, traveling and establishing posts all over. I'm talking about the UN as such. We did not have the tools to take part in that battle of perceptions that in a Syria that at that point was permeated by social media, and they had access to anything, and they were communicating in and out. So that was one big missed opportunity. We should not do that again. We need to recognize that this battle is real, and it's extremely important, maybe more important than boots on the ground and weapons. The other one is that as the head of mission and the chief observer, I briefed the UN Security Council on a few occasions related to massacres. We had the Hula incident, we had the two twin car bombings in Damascus where we were close but not too close, so we were there very quickly. The Hula incident with 49 children, age 1 to 11, that was lined up in the square of the village for a message to the population. Now, we had people on the ground very quickly, so we were able to discover the mortar fragments and different, let's say, what could have been evidence. But when the group of people then briefed me on my way to discuss with Kofi Annan and the Security Council, they were not able to build anything near a convincing case where I was willing to argue these are the facts. I could not point a finger. When I asked them, where's the picture of the impact of this mortar shell? Of course, if it's like this, or like this, or like this, you know immediately much, much more. And then what kind of mortar is it? Who produces it? What's the range of this mortar? Do we have anything about the radar picture? None of these things were they able to give me, which meant briefing the Security Council with 3 players expecting one message and the other 2 players obviously expecting a totally different message. All I could say in this respect was that we cannot point a finger on who did this for real. These are the facts, but I cannot point a finger. That is a big lost opportunity, because I believe still today that in 2012 we could have changed the dynamics in the Security Council if we were able to have more evidence in terms of a team that could provide battlefield forensics for us. The third point, that's on a more personal note, is when we decided to recommend not extending and moving to a more political mandate, we actually discussed whether at that point we had been in Mohassan, we had 7 posts all over the country, violence was picking up. We discussed whether it was a good idea to take the leadership and 20 observers and establish a post inside, at that time, parts of Homs. Was extremely difficult at that time. And then raise the UN flag and say, these are the hostages of the world, and then use these communication channels to tell that story. We had very serious discussions whether that could work and turn the tide and create different dynamics. We decided not to do it. I was the decision maker because I decided I did not have that authority to face the troop contributing countries and putting their men and women into harm's way in such a way. It was tempting. We will never know whether it could have worked.
Thanks. We'll soon go in for a landing here, but Francesca, I want to round off with a little challenge to you. You in your talk, quote the late Anthony Shadid, who said to be understanding the conflict, to really understand what goes on, the only way is to, in a sense, immerse yourself into it. I think you used the term to be in the veins of that society. You also said in this discussion that if you look at your own understanding of the conflict a few years back, and I may be misrepresenting you here, but my understanding is that when you look at yourself a few years back, your understanding of the conflict was biased in a way that, in a sense, conveyed an understanding contributing to sustain the conflict. Not giving you the personal responsibility, but I think we all had a very different perspective on what the Syrian conflict was about, or many of us had 3-4 years back than we have today. And if you link that to your call for a deep personal immersion, in which in fact the only instrument that remains is really yourself and your own understanding and empathy and sympathies, isn't there a problem here somewhere in that we end up having only one instrument left, which is a rather unreliable one?
What do you mean? I mean, about not being objective, or?
It seems to me that the space for bias is virtually unlimited if you link those factors together.
No, actually, no, because the point is, at the beginning, look, I was very surprised, for example, when the Islamic State was established, I was still in Syria. Well, I'm speaking of the Caliphate. I moved to Baghdad. Now I'm based in Baghdad after 1 year, more or less. And I think that I realized clearly the Iraqi roots of the Islamic State in 1 hour in Iraq. I'm not joking. I mean, when you live in Iraq, it's very clear where the Islamic State comes from. So the point is, I'm very surprised that it's something that I remember that the first journalists to write about the Iraqi background of the Islamic State were Martin Schulow for The Guardian and Liz Sly for The Washington Post. Both of them are among our best Middle East correspondents today. Both of them are veterans of Iraq. They have a few experience of Syria, almost nothing. It's not their responsibility, it's because of kidnappings. I mean, Martin can't wear any niqab for sure. And Liz, simply, she's not a war correspondent. She doesn't do the front line, so of course she couldn't cover Syria when it became a war. But basically, they've been living for years in Iraq. So still today, I wonder why it took 1 year for them to write what we all know now, about what the mistakes of the United States in Iraq, the corruption of the Iraqi government, all these kind of things. The point is that at the beginning, I mean, we didn't know anything of Syria. It's the same, You know that when we went to Ukraine, some of us landed in Moldavia because we didn't even know the name of the airports when we booked the flights. And at some point, it's ridiculous, because I remember a photographer, but where is the war? Everything is quiet here. What's the name of the airport? I mean, it was in Moldavia. This is the reality with journalism today. I mean, I think I'm honest with readers when I say, I'm the foreign journalist, the Western journalist who spent the longest time in Syria. And can you believe that not only I've never been in Damascus, I've never been in the other side of Aleppo, in regime-held Aleppo. Of course, this would be possible with the cooperation among journalists because, you can't cross the front line now. But the point is, over time, no, it's really just a matter of time because basically things become clear over time. It's like, one of the problems with Israelis and Palestinians is Israelis and Palestinians are much better than us, honestly. Foreign journalists, foreign activists, we are from outside supporting one of the two sides. That's a typical case of, we are now fueling the conflict. The point is that it's typical of each of us. When you go for the first time to, Ramallah, which is what, usually we do, we start also because it's very easy, to get experience in the West Bank, logistically easy. For the first year, basically, you really hate Israelis. You think that, okay, Israelis are to blame for everything. Then, after 1 year, you start to see Hamas, Fatah, and it's really becomes much more complex than that. Syria was exactly the same. Every conflict is the same. So the point is time and experience. But the point is that the journalists that I met 4 years ago on the field, today are running some bed and breakfast somewhere because they are not journalists anymore. I mean, we have no experience anymore. And that's the point. I mean, sometimes there are problems. It's not a difficult thing. I mean, the more you see, the more you understand and the less you are biased. I mean, I don't think this is something that I was thinking at the beginning, or maybe it's also something that honestly, as a journalist, you perceive it immediately. For example, now I was in Syria last time in April. In August, when I was in the Maldives, and this was surreal because everybody was watching the Olympic Games except for the Maldivians who were, watching the siege of Aleppo and just supporting Al-Qaeda, in front of TV, in cafe and restaurants, and it was really surreal. Basically, what I realized is that in last August, when rebels were trying to break the siege, journalists, some of us supporting the Assad side, some of us supporting the rebel side, we were really supporting one of the two sides. And at that point, I told myself, okay, even for me, at some point, I was really hoping that Al-Qaeda was able to break the siege. Because, of course, Aleppo, I'm attached to Aleppo. So for me, the idea that, was gonna be over like that was unthinkable. So, we were really hoping that Al-Qaeda could break the siege. At that point, I told myself, okay, now you are not gonna go to Syria for a while, because when you reach the point that you are so involved, that you are in front of a TV hoping that one of the two sides do something, okay, as a journalist, it's a matter of self-awareness, just thinking over it, okay, now stop. Now you work on the Maldives, now you do something else, then after 3-4 months I will be, again, everything will be okay again, and I will go back to Syria without having this kind of bias. It's something that as a journalist, honestly, is not difficult. You feel it. At some point, you don't have anymore the right distance, which is why at some point I left Palestine, because I didn't have anymore the right distance. But you feel it as a journalist. It's something that, from the outside can look like a problem, is not. When you are a journalist, a good journalist, then, if you're a bad journalist, but it's
Thanks, Francesca. More food for thought about the similarities and differences between conducting journalism and conducting research. More on the jihadist threat, if you want. You said earlier that the Syria war is different in that now we are, those of us in the West, we have to realize that we are the enemy. We could discuss that at length. We won't. We may discuss it over drinks if that is our favorite topic. We certainly have covered some of the ground when it comes to Syria, but as you say, while it may not be complicated, it still is complex, so there is food for thought there as well. And I particularly enjoyed your reflections on journalism, where I think there is plenty of issues to discuss when it comes to the way in which journalism is changing, but where I also think you have highlighted in an eminent manner what it is that journalism can contribute to when it's well done. So thanks a lot for your talk this evening. Thank you for contributing to the debate. Thanks to Robert for sharing your reflections, living in an environment where journalism was a part of your daily context, and having reflected on these issues long and hard in your life, as you would say yourself, as a soldier. We have some flowers for you before we move on.
Yes, thank you.
And Francesca, you also get an image. This is PRIO's 50th anniversary print. I know that you have several residences, one in Ramallah, another in Baghdad, and a third in Tuscany. I'm not sure where you're going to place this, but I hope that you get a chance to see it once in a while in one of those residences.
Grazie.